the paper covers some empirical work about what happened in Australia when people were allowed to withdraw some of their superannuation savings early because of COVID. Ben?
Very much. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the invitation. I'm just going to share my slides. So good evening, good morning, greetings wherever you are joining this session. It's my pleasure to be presenting. This is joint work with Susan Thorpe, Hazel Bateman, Isabella Debrescu and Junhao Liu here at UNSW or at University of Sydney. And the paper, as Mike just said, is about some of the factors underlying people's decision to take the early access to their retirement savings, which is one of the policy responses that the Australian government made when the pandemic hit. So the context for this work is really in a literature that we're all familiar with, that saving for retirement is something that doesn't come naturally. People often need to be persuaded to think about retirement, to think about savings. In the psychological literature, this is often discussed as being driven by things like present bias or myopic thinking or irrational discounting. And in lots of places around the world and lots of work has tried to get people to think about their savings and how they can have an adequate amount of money in their retirement. In the Australian context, we have mandatory employer contributions to what we call superannuation or retirement funds. So it's not so much a question of getting people to start retirement savings, but it's still trying to engage them in that decision and to make them think about what it means to have some money for themselves in retirement, what counts as an adequate amount. So most people have 9.5% of earnings at least coming from their employer contributions. Significant minority of people top up that with voluntary employee contributions. These are usually in a broad portfolio of assets. But one of the features of the Australian setup is that there's a very strict preservation aspect, maintenance to it. So you can't access your retirement savings under usual circumstances unless there are some extreme personal or financial hardship. So it's very difficult to get superannuation out under typical circumstances. However, as we all know, this year has not been a typical one. And just like everywhere else in the world, the pandemic came to Australia in around March. The responses started coming out. And one of the things that the Australian government did very early on in their response to the pandemic was to allow people to do away with this strict preservation feature and allow people access to their retirement savings. And this quote from the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, kind of captures the sentiment that the government were running with. So he said in Parliament, superannuation is their money. When they need it at a time in a pandemic, we're going to make sure they can get access to it. So it's a kind of a change in the rhetoric around what your superannuation savings is for. It's not preserved for retirement, it's your money, and if you need it, you can get access to it. So they put forward this COVID-19 early release of super scheme. It was announced back on the 22nd of March this year with access available from the 20th of April. To be eligible, you had to be in one of these categories, so either unemployed, in receipt of some social security payment like unemployment benefit or parenting, you've been made redundant in 2020 or had your working hours reduced by 20% or more. And you could apply for up to $10,000 before the end of June 2020, which is the end of the financial year in Australia, or up to another 10,000 by December 31st, 2020. So in a couple of weeks' time. That date was originally September, but then they extended it out. But the big feature of this early release scheme was that it was a very low friction application process. So in contrast to this strict preservation and only access if you had these severe circumstances, you could now go to the ATO, the Australian Taxation Office website, through a portal called MyGov, and pretty much self-rate your eligibility for the scheme. So you didn't have to go to your pension provider. You just had to go and tap in your details at the ATO, and then the money, if you had it in your account, you could access that 10,000. So here are some headline figures just showing how popular this scheme has been, how much of a response people have taken to it. So by early December, there was about 4.7 million applications to withdraw. Average payment was about 7,500. More than 20% of super fund members have taken early access. It's about 35, nearly $36 billion worth of superannuation assets that have been withdrawn out of a total holding of almost 3 trillion. And about 40% of people have withdrawn in both rounds. So 3.4 million in the initial round and 1.4 million have repeated, have taken the 10,000 or taken some amount out in both rounds. So it's been very popular. It's been administratively quite successful. I think the funds have been processing all the applications very quickly. The ATO have been funding it, have been processing it quickly. So in terms of access to money when people needed it, it seems, or people said they needed it, it seemed like a good response. So what we've done in this project, where we're trying to sort of look at some of the determinants of people's decisions to take out early release, was that we have teamed up with a large super fund called Cbus, who I'll tell you more about in a moment, to survey some of their members who took advantage of this early release scheme back in May, so early on, just after the announcement had been made. We then also conducted a control sample survey of people who are eligible to withdraw but didn't. So the basic idea here was to see what were some of the key factors that people might be saying, well, this is why I did it versus this is why I didn't take it out. Could we see any sort of predictors of people's decision to take it out? And then we also looked at fund level administrative data for the predictors of the amount taken. So as I mentioned, the maximum limit was 10,000. We wanted to see what were some of the predictors of whether or not people took that full amount. So turning to our super fund partner, the fund is called Seabus. It's a profit for members fund that primarily serves the construction sector. It's got about 760,000 members, manages around 56 billion in savings. About 24% of their members took this early release, with an average withdrawal of about 8,500. And over 3 weeks in May of this year, Cbus surveyed about 3,000 of their members who'd taken superannuation savings under this early release scheme. And in addition to the demographics, the survey asked people a few different questions. I'm going to focus on these 4 in the results that I'm going to talk about. So they were how long people thought about their decision to take their money out, why they withdrew the money, what were they planning to do with it, whether they thought about the consequences of taking the money, and what the estimated impact was on their retirement savings. So this is sort of where the title comes from, the 20K now versus 50K later. People worked out what the impact might be on an overall retirement savings goal. So here's a table just showing some summary statistics of the survey sample. The link at the bottom of this page is to a CEPAR publication, which covers some of the work that I will talk about today. You can see here that we have a sample with average age of about 40. Females are only 15%, which reflects the overall membership of Cbus. It's very male dominated. As I said, it's a construction industry focused fund. And you can see that the median amount that people took out was indeed the $10,000 that they were allowed to take out. And the percentage that people were withdrawing of their overall fund was really quite substantial. So these are people taking money out from balances that are not particularly large to begin with. So this is a significant impact on the amount that they have saved. Okay, so turning to the amounts that people took, this figure shows withdrawals relative to the 10,000 or the remaining balances that they have. So what we've plotted here are just the percentage of people who took 10,000 and what they had left in their account after taking it. And you can see that the vast majority here took 10,000 and still had a remaining balance of over $1,000. So they took up to what they could, what they could take, but they weren't clearing their accounts out. But it does seem that people were strongly driven by that kind of designated amount, the amount that they were able to take up. This table lists some of the main reasons that people gave us for their withdrawal, and the way that the scheme was set up and was framed, as that sort of quote from Scott Morrison illustrates, was that it was trying to address people's immediate concerns. So they really need that money, so we should let them have access to it. And you can see from this self-report of what people were saying they were doing, that's true, that there were a large number of people who were saying, you know, I need it to replace lost income, or I need it to pay immediate expenses. But there are also people who were, you know, a significant portion of people who were saying, no, I'm focusing more on the future. I'm thinking about future bills. I'm thinking about extra savings, which I think is interesting just from the perspective of the present bias, the myopic thinking that is often invoked as the reason that people aren't saving. These people were actually saying, no, I'm going to take it out for more of a rainy day. We also asked them how long they spent thinking about making this decision before they did the withdrawal. Again, a lot of the rhetoric in the press, at least, about this scheme has been that these were decisions that people had considered for a long time, that they thought about the impact on their savings. And what we can see is, yes, the majority of people are saying that they thought about the decision for longer than a week. This again is self-report, but there's also people that said, oh, I did it as soon as I heard about it. I didn't really think about it, or only spent a day. So there's a range of different responses here in terms of how much people are actually at least self-reporting what they thought. Now we turn to a bit more of a quantitative estimate of the estimates of impact on their withdrawal. So what we gave people was the question in the top right of the screen. So rather than actually asking them to come up with a number, you know, estimate how much you'll have saved at retirement because you've now taken this money out, we just gave them kind of bands, category of responses to say, what do you think the impact's going to be? Is it going to be between 5,000, 10,000, so on? Or they could say, I don't know, or I don't care. And you can see from this slide that there are a range of different responses here, and the range of responses to me suggests that people are not really particularly well calibrated in terms of understanding the impact. So there's about 30% of people who just said they didn't know or they don't care, which arguably could be the correct response here. We can maybe discuss that in questions. But there's almost equal numbers of people underestimating it as getting it right, and then there's the largest portion here of overestimates. But globally, I look at this and think people haven't got a very strong idea of what's going on. So now turning to this control sample, we gave a smaller number of people. These now weren't Cbus members. These were people who were eligible. So they did have a superannuation account. They could have taken it out, but they didn't. And we asked them the same sorts of things. So how long they thought about the decision, why they didn't withdraw the money, whether they thought about the consequences, and a counterfactual estimate of the impact on retirement savings. And we did this so that we could then conduct a regression analysis to assess the likelihood of taking early release conditional on being eligible to do so. So this just shows a comparison of the early release survey from Seabus with our smaller control sample. And you can see that it's not matched in terms of gender, and it's also not matched in terms of overall balance before early release, but we did try and control those factors when we were doing the regressions. So it's not a perfect snapshot, but it gives us a point of comparison. So some of the main findings from this regression analysis, when we use the Cbus sample and this control sample, we find the likelihood of taking the early release conditional on being eligible is 7 percentage points higher if you report future concerns as the main reason for your decision, which is, as I was pointing out before, perhaps an interesting result given the focus is often on immediate need, but actually those people reporting future concerns seem to be more likely to take it. So people, as I said, saying, you know, I want to put some extra money in the bank just in case, or I'm worried about my ability to pay bills in the future. It was also 3 percentage points higher if they did not think about the consequences of withdrawing their super in terms of impact, or they weren't sure or they didn't care. 4 percentage points higher if they underestimated the impact of early release on retirement wealth, or they said they don't know or they don't care. And 4 percentage points higher if they're aged in the 40 to 49 bracket rather than the 18 to 29 bracket. So we see these as speaking to, the potential reasons for having the policy in place in the first place, and whether it's really capturing and targeting the right kind of people who are engaging in the right kind of decision processes. The last thing I want to talk about is the fund level admin data that we looked at for predictors of the amount that people took in their early release. So now turning to the comparison of the full Cbus membership, we can see that the people that took out in the round 1 early release and the round 2 early release matches fairly well with our early release survey data from Cbus. The thing that I want to point out here on this table in particular is this clear impact of the amount that people were told they were allowed to take out. In other words, the limit was 10,000 and the median amount that people took was 10,000, which shows possibly a strong anchoring effect or an implied endorsement effect that if the government tells me 10,000 is an amount I can take out, then people will take out that 10,000. If it had been 5,000, they'd probably have taken 5. If it was 15 and they could take it, they probably would have taken 15, rather than it being a kind of deliberative calculation of, well, how much do I need to offset any costs that I'm experiencing? This is obviously generalizing, but it does seem to be acting as a kind of anchor. So using these admin data in a regression, we can look at the likelihood of taking as much as possible for the 10K or indeed your entire balance, conditional on taking the first round of early release. And we find some of these highlight findings. So it's 20 percentage points higher if your super balance is in the top 3 quintiles. So the people that have the more money seem to be more likely to be taking it. It's lower if your estimated salary is in the middle 3 quintiles, the 22 to 77K range. It's 1 to 2 percentage points higher if tenure with Cbus is in the top 3 quintiles over 7 years. So some of these are going to be related to each other, obviously. And it's 2 percentage points higher if you're aged in the 30 to 59 compared to the 18 to 29. So again, looking at, are these targeting the right people? It seems that the people taking this out are people perhaps with the higher balances in the first place, rather than maybe those people that are really needing it. One final piece of data here is that we did also ask people what they said they were going to use the money for. This was a question that was added later on, so we only have a sample of just under 700, 682 for this one. But you can see that consistent with the sort of self-report reasons, people are also saying, yes, I need it to spend, but a large chunk of people are also saying, I'm going to save it and put it back into a bank account, which seems like an odd decision. And that also tallies up if you try and tie the immediate concerns with their main reason to withdraw. So the people that said they wanted to spend were the majority of people that said, yes, I have immediate concerns. The people that said I want to save, the majority were the people that saying I have the future concerns. There's some consistency in that self-report. We've also got this chunk of people who are going to pay off a mortgage or a credit card, which arguably could be a rational thing to be doing with that money. So just to finish up, I've got 2 discussion slides. One is just, was it the right policy response? It was supposed to be targeting immediate concerns. People are also listing future concerns. We've got older, wealthier members seem to be more likely to withdraw. People with poorer estimates, less thinking time seem to be more likely to withdraw. And there's this potential for it to sort of change the mental account for superannuation in ways that perhaps go against the original intention of the program to have it strictly preserved for retirement. And we also have this evidence for anchoring on a permitted amount. And then my final slide is just for discussion, really, that there are lots of alternative policy responses out there. Different countries have adopted different things in response to the pandemic, and it'd be interesting to contrast these with the Australian response just to see how effective and how popular they've been. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.